Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our podcast Misconceptions. We're so glad you're here. I have a very special guest. This is actually the first time I'm doing a recording at night. And the reason I'm doing this recording at night is because I am welcoming my very newly made friend, Dvori Rosenbaum, who is joining me from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Dvori.
Hi, I'm
So
so
excited you're
excited to be
here.
here.
I'm
I
so
love
glad you
your
said
podcast.
yes.
Yeah, I love your podcast. I've been listening. I've learned so much, and I'm really, really honored that you've invited me to come on.
Well, I'm excited you said yes. I know that you had some reservations, and I know that it's really is brave to come and tell your story, especially the story that you're about to tell. And I know that this is a story that needs to be told. And we will get to what you are and who you are and what you do today. But I want you to start by taking us back in time to 13 years ago when you were I guess, a fairly young mother. Tell me a little bit about your family 13 years ago, and we're going to start from there.
Okay. 13 years ago, I was 30 years old, expecting my sixth child. Life was really good. I had just finished up with a full-time job. I had worked full-time till then, and I had finished up with that job, and I was just looking forward to being stay-at-home mum, volunteering in school, and just doing all the, good things that mums can do. And I was expecting my sixth baby, and I remember was approaching the 20-week ultrasound, and I sort of mentioned to one of my sisters, "Oh, I'm going tomorrow for my ultrasound," and she said, "Are you going to take Yumi along? Is Yumi going to go with you?" Yumi's my husband, and I said, "No. Why should I take him along? I've done this so many times before. What's the
Right,
big deal?"
right.
Anyway, I went for that ultrasound and I was sitting in the chair and I was sitting, having it done and it was taking a really, really long time. And I think I even dozed off because I was that tired and I wasn't, all I was thinking is like, is this a boy or is it a girl? That was my question that I wanted to ask. And the doctor suddenly, turned off the computer screen and said to me in a very matter-of-fact way, your baby has a lot of medical issues, and I suggest you terminate the pregnancy. Just like that. It was like a slap in the face. And I really was in shock and I didn't know what to do with that. And I was by myself. And I remember she took me out and put me in this small room. It's called the quiet room, where there was
Hmm.
a room with a couch and a box of tissues. And she said, call your husband and call your doctor. And, I called my husband and he came and we spoke a little bit more to the doctor and then we went home.
Okay, I want to stop you here. I want to ask you some questions. So just so we can set the stage as to what it means to get this diagnosis. First of all, how old were your children at the time? This was your sixth baby. How old were the other young ones at home?
Okay. So my oldest son was 11. Then I had an 8-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son, 4-year-old son, and a 2-year-old baby boy.
And they knew you were expecting, at that point. I mean, sixth baby, you're probably showing by 20 weeks ultrasound, right?
Yes. Yes, they knew. They knew. I mean, probably at 20 weeks, we weren't talking about it as much, but yeah, they knew. They knew we were having a baby.
Okay. And when you remember, just want to kind of slow into this conversation because it's such a powerful experience when you begin to share, just beginning to get this diagnosis. And I'm also very aware that the first thing they said to you was, "We think you should terminate this pregnancy." And I'm wondering if you remember that moment where you began to become alert to the fact that this was totally not what you expected, and that there was that the awareness moment of there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. Do you remember that time?
Look, I remember her saying, I think you should terminate the pregnancy. And in my mind, it was like, terminate the pregnancy? That's not even an option. For me, I didn't think it was an option.
Did you think
So
did you ever consider it? I mean, when you say it was not an option, I think that that's an interesting point because some people, we talk about options counseling, but was this
yeah,
considered not an option because you felt like halachically religious law would prevent you from doing this, or it was just never something that you would have considered?
I think both. I think at that time, like, remember, this is the first time I'm dealing with something like this. I hadn't ever heard of, going to an ultrasound and finding that there were issues. And I think in my mind, it was just not something that I probably thought halachically I can't do it, but as well as that, it wasn't something that I actually wanted to do. I think it was a bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And once you knew, once you had this, were they able to explain anything to you about the diagnosis at that time? Or were they
Yeah.
basically, what do you remember?
So I don't remember much. I just remember her going through and just saying there were a few things that might have gone wrong in the early development of the fetus, and there was like maybe an issue. I think the main problem was the kidneys, but there was an issue with the heart, something with the feet. So there was a sort of a syndrome of things that had gone wrong with the development of the fetus, of the baby. But I don't really remember exactly, I remember thinking she's probably making a big mistake. That's what I had in my
Yeah.
mind. Like, she's probably new at this. She probably doesn't know what she's talking about. It must be a mistake.
And,
And
and, and what's the next stage like in Melbourne? The medicine is different there. It's socialized medicine. What is the medical process once you have this like awareness that there's something very wrong? What happens next?
okay, so we went to my obstetrician. We sat down, we sort of went through like different, we went through the reports. Um, And then he suggested that we go for further testing. So there were more ultrasounds. I remember going like at about 30 weeks to have some ultrasound of the heart to see what the issues were there. Um, we just kept on monitoring because really at that stage, we didn't know if I was going to give birth to a still baby or if I was going to give birth to a baby who would have severe health issues. So it was really very unknown. I remember at first they didn't think the baby would survive. And then at some point in the pregnancy, they said, you know what, there's a chance that he will live. So it was that sort of, just coming to terms with different realities. Yeah.
And when you, I guess, as that did you ever get a formal diagnosis? I'm not asking you what it is, but did you ever get like it is a this and this and this syndrome, or it was just a no? Hmm.
No, we didn't.
Hmm.
We did see a geneticist, but I don't think we ever got anything,
Hmm.
diagnosis or anything like that.
Hmm. So, as the pregnant, before we get to what happens after the pregnancy, there's so much time between 20 weeks and 40 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can just tell me about what life was like at that point in your time.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we chose not to tell people. I did tell my parents. I told one of my sisters who I'm very close to. And at some point I reached out to a friend who was going through her own family's medical challenge. She had a child that was sick and she was struggling with that. And I thought, you know what? She would get what I'm going through. But other than that, we didn't tell anyone. And I just carried on with my normal life. So I had to go on and sort of put on a show that like my life was perfect and I'm so excited to have this baby. And I was really, really putting on a show and I was really, really scared. There were nights that I didn't sleep the whole night. Just, wondering what is my life going to be like. Um, there was no, at that time, there wasn't really any number that I could call, like no organization to sort of help me through it. So I really had to sort of create my own support network and do my own research. And, we spoke to Rabbanim, and one of the things that Ravana actually said, I needed to get a bit of chizuk. I remember one Rav saying, doctors can make mistakes, so you should be cautiously optimistic. And that little bit of hope kept me going because, like, I wanted to think, maybe this is all a mistake. But in reality, I knew probably that, it wasn't. Um, I did get a lot of chizuk from reading stories about other people who had gone through things that were like similar stories. I read an article in the Binner magazine of someone who had got a diagnosis that she was carrying a Down syndrome baby. And I got in touch with her. And I just told her how scared I am. Like, this is just like so scary to be, to have this big, scary, thing coming my way. And she said to me, you're actually lucky that you have time to prepare yourself. Some people just go in and have a stillbirth, or some people go in and have a sick baby and they're not able to have that time to prepare themselves. But you're actually having this time to sort of prepare yourself. And that actually comforted me because I realized, those 20 weeks, as hard as they were, really prepared me for eventually, having my baby and then losing him.
What was During that, I'm wondering about that line from from the Rav, about from the rabbi about, sometimes doctors can be wrong and you should still have hope a little bit, like cautiously optimistic. Did that hold you, or did that like threaten some of the reality of, but really everything we're looking at is conclusive? Like, I'm wondering if you felt like I'm hesitating on that comment, and I'm wondering like how you feel looking back on it now.
So it's interesting because for me, that was the best thing. I
Mm.
needed to have that little bit of hope and I wanted to be optimistic and I was cautiously optimistic. I remember like mentioning it to someone else who said she would not have appreciated hearing that and I couldn't get that because everyone's different. But for me, that worked.
Right. I guess I can imagine where there would be space for, I'm here to support you and care about you, and I'll pray that the outcome is as we hope for, which is different than, sometimes doctors are wrong. But I think what I'm also hearing from you is there was a level of preparation that you were doing at the same time as being optimistic. It wasn't I was just being optimistic and pretending everything wasn't happening. I was actually doing the work of preparing for what was going to come next.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in that, I'm wondering if you could explore with me a little bit the term "I was afraid." Tell me a little bit more about what were you fearful of?
I honestly I can't say exactly. I mean, it's scary to think that you could give birth to a stillbirth, and not go home with the baby. It's scary to think that you'll have a sick baby to care for many years. It's the whole, everything about it was scary. It's just the unknown. But
Yeah,
really, all of our lives are unknown at all times. But,
true, true.
this was something I knew about and but I really didn't know what was going to be.
I think about when parents have these kinds of diagnoses, and I've really heard both comments, and I've heard the comments of, I actually hope that the pregnancy ends in a stillbirth so that I don't have to, that I won't have to be faced with caring for a very sick child for a very long time and all of that unknown. Is that something that your mind played with at all?
It's interesting because, obviously we all want to have healthy children, healthy babies, but I wanted that baby was mine. I wanted that baby whatever would be. So even if the baby was going to be sick, I wanted him so badly.
Yeah.
Um, and I can fast forward to when he was born and the doctors told us that we wouldn't be taking him home. That was like such a heart-wrenching moment. I just can still feel the pain, the physical pain I felt thinking I wouldn't be taking this baby home. I was happy to care for a sick baby at that stage. I just wanted him so badly.
Mm, mm. Okay. And when you think about, I want to hear more about those 20 weeks. You didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew what was going on. What is it like to walk into that room of, and everybody's celebrating the pregnancy, and oh my gosh, you look so good, and or hopefully they're saying all those nice things, right? And
Yeah,
and then but you know that the outcome is going to be one that's going to tear your heart out.
yeah. So I was like one big actress. I just, I knew that when I was at home, I could be myself, but when I walked out the door, I had to make sure I looked good and you know, I was acting. I was acting. I wore sunglasses the whole time. Just in case I need to, I bought them as a hairband, but I pulled them down when I was in my car and I was crying. There were times that I really felt really sad. And it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah. And what about with your children? Were they talking about the future and the new baby and where the baby was going to sleep and all the things kids talk about?
Yeah. So they did, and we just went along with it. But I knew that I wanted to do a bit of research on that as well as like, how do we deal with the children? Do we tell them? Do we not? Like, I don't want to break their hearts either, but I did want to prepare them. I mean, I was prepared, so they should be prepared as well. And I did reach
Mm,
out to Guy Lifeline, to find out what do you do in this case. So they told me that very close to when I give birth, I should tell the children. And I did the night before. I was actually induced. And the night before, I called in my two older children, 11-year-old and 8-year-old. And I said that the doctors had told us that the baby was very sick. We're not sure what's going to be, if he's going to live or if he's going to die. But that's obviously, what Hashem wants, this is the situation we're in and this is what Hashem wants and we're just going to go, we'll see what happens. But I just wanted to prepare them. And it was really hard. It was hard. It was
I think about that being so, oh, yeah,
yeah. I remember my 11-year-old, he played piano, and his way of dealing with it is he walked over to the piano and started playing. My 8-year-old, yeah, just was sad. And then she ran off and went to play with her friends. So, but it broke my heart more,
of course.
to have to tell them this.
Yeah. Did you did you get guidance? I would love to hear a little bit more about. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made once a baby is born that has a very severe diagnosis, and often these diagnoses are really towards like the way we're going to do this is palliative care, that we're going to support the baby, we're going to care for the child, and then we're going to allow the child to die a natural death. A lot of these are big religious law questions. These are shilas that are asked to the big rabbis, as we say. Do you remember as those questions began to be asked and answered? Was it you? Was it Yomi? Like, who was asking these questions?
Okay, so we did reach out to Professor Rabbi Avram Steinberg from Shari Tzedek.
Yes.
And he was unbelievable. He was just so helpful and he took all of the medical reports and he read them and he guided us. And
I want to just mention who he is. So if anybody's not familiar with him, Rabbi Dr. Avraham Steinberg he is actually a pediatric neurologist, I believe, and also incredibly wise Talmid Chacham, a Ben Torah, somebody who really guides people on on the medical environment. He's not necessarily making halachic decisions, but he in certain circumstances he may be, but he comes to that with a medical and religious law background. So you're accessing an expert. For those who might not be familiar with the system, you're accessing an expert who is not only medically knowledgeable and savvy, but also rabbinically and religious law savvy. And the combination of the two provides guidance as to how they would move forward. You can go,
that's right.
right. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't remember everything. We're talking about 13 years ago, but I do remember one thing. He said that if the baby is born and is not breathing, we do not need to we shouldn't be resuscitating him because he's not really viable. Like he's not going to have a quality of life. He had looked at all the reports and he said that was one thing. If he's not breathing at birth, do not try and resuscitate. Other than that, we sort of we decided we'll wait and see what happens at birth, and then shortly after birth we sent him more reports and he sort of guided us through that.
Well, do you remember when he told you to allow your son to die?
Pretty much a few hours after birth, the doctors said that the main issue was that he was born with one kidney and that kidney was not functioning properly. And without kidney function, there was no way that we would live more than a week.
Okay. Okay. And I'm thinking about you being postpartum, even though prepared, right? Even though you were knowledgeable, there's no way that anybody can truly prepare for that moment and that information. What do you
Yeah.
remember of your mindset? What do you remember of what was going through your head during that time?
Okay. I remember just I was very scared the whole way through, and somehow, like a week before, I just came to this place of acceptance. I was just like really calm, and I don't know why that happened because we sometimes think something's going to be really, really, really scary, and then when it actually happens, it's not as bad as we think it will be. And it was a bit like that. I was like really calm. I mean, I had my scary, like my moments. I was like, I can't do this. This is so scary. But like I went in, I was induced on a Monday. It was actually the timing was between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I was induced on a Monday. I went in on early Monday morning. And because I was induced, I had an epidural and it was like really, really calm. My mother was there. Obviously, Yumi was there with me. And I took a midwife, a friend of mine, and she was there to support me through it. And really, the day went really smoothly. I have very long labors. I think just before I was about to give birth, that's when it hit me because they sort of pressed a button and in walked this whole medical team, like 12 people walked into the room, and that's where I felt like, okay, this is the moment, it's about to happen. And that was like a very, very scary minute.
Sure.
I gave birth, and the baby, and he cried loudly, and they passed me the most beautiful baby I had ever seen. And I thought, they made a mistake. It was all a mistake. He just looked perfect. He was a nice size. I couldn't see anything wrong with him. And they passed him to me, and I'm like, he's crying. Everything's good. Everything's going to be okay. And then that lasted about 1 minute, or maybe less, maybe 30 seconds. And then they took him away. And then I was just left to just sort of recover from that part. And then a few hours later, Yumi came into the room and said, he just, from the look on his face, I knew it wasn't good news. And he said to me, doctors say that we won't be taking him home. It doesn't look like we'll be taking him home. And that, again, I'm just saying that feeling was like gut-wrenching. It was so painful. It's like I just gave birth to this beautiful baby, and I want to take him home. I'm not, I'm not leaving him. I'm taking him home. That sort of it was really, really hard. But got myself together, and I remember going to the NICU to have a look at him, and he was all connected to all these wires and everything. And it was just unbelievable, because that night, the nurse that was on duty was one of my friends.
Mm.
And she was caring for him. And it was just like such hashgacha. Like I felt, okay, I can go back to my room and try and recuperate, because this friend of mine was actually happened to be the nurse on duty. That was
Wow.
amazing. Um, the next day they transferred him to the children's hospital. And so I went along with, and pretty much we had a week of just, a week to spend with him. I didn't know if it would be a week, but it ended up being a week where we just held him and spoke to him and took photos of him, and welcomed him into our family and made him a part of our family. And yeah, it was unbelievable.
You brought the children to meet him, right?
I brought my two oldest children, and I think that was very important for them, because sort of they got to meet him, they got to hold him. Yeah, that was a good decision.
And you have beautiful pictures of them together. I've seen
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen them.
yeah.
So I'm wondering about the decision to transfer to Children's Hospital when we knew that you were not doing much intervention at this time. And the reason I'm asking is because there's, different protocols that different hospitals will have in place. And let's say, for example, here in Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, when there is a baby, we actually have women give birth in CHOP, in a special delivery unit, when we like in a circumstance just like this, where they're unclear whether they're going to be intervention, if there's going to be intervention, no intervention, but they deliver in the children's hospital, and then the decisions are made there, and then ultimately, but really one of the things that they try very hard to do is make decisions before the birth, so that there could be as much opportunity for mother and family to be with the baby as possible. And because let's say in a case like this, in a situation like this, if we know that at some point there's no intervention, then the baby would really be primarily with the mom at the whole time. And it sounds like that began to happen for you at Children's Hospital, right? They allowed you to go there.
Yes.
Was there a discussion at some point of like, no more hospital, and we're going to come home? Like, was that ever a discussion?
It was at one point, because they actually weren't sure how long this would go on for. But I think at some point they saw, like, just trying to think, maybe day 5, they did some blood tests that morning, and they said he's only got a few hours left. And they actually gave us a special room in the hospital. It was actually a really beautiful room with a couch, and they said you stay here for as long as you need this room. And that's where we spent the last 2 days, one of them
Wow.
being in.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me about spending Yom Kippur in the hospital with your child. I mean, I think one of the most profound photos that you shared with me when I had the opportunity to spend some time with you is this photo of it was your father. right? Blessing your son in anticipation of Yom
Yeah.
Kippur. And I mean, that photo completely takes my breath away. But tell me what that was like living in that space.
Okay, so on Erev Yom Kippur, like in the morning, Yumi decided he's going to go home and just get ready and then come back. And just after he left, the doctors came and said, your baby only has a few hours left to live. And I just called Yumi, come right back, just drop everything, leave everything, just come back. I need you here. Um, and so it was, I think my parents and my parents-in-law also came to bench the baby. And yeah, that was quite emotional. And then we just after they left, it was almost Yom Tov, and we just went into Yom Tov just not knowing how long this is going to take. Like I sort of
Right.
thought, he's a holy baby, he's going to die right as Yom Kippur comes in. And I remember we realized that we don't have any candles to light, and
Mm.
the hospital staff, they were amazing. They ran around the whole hospital to try and find me two candles, and they came back with like one big blue candle and one big yellow candle. I don't remember, but they were like these big, 24-hour candles. And I remember when I was lighting them, I was thinking, I wonder what's going to last longer. Are the candles going to last longer, or is my baby gonna, I was just that was a thought that sort of went through my head. Yom Kippur came in and we davened. We just took turns at holding our baby and davening, and it was like a really holy time. Like it was surreal. Yeah.
I think about
During,
also like Yom Kippur is like you're off the grid, right? For somebody who
yes,
doesn't know that, like there's no phone, so you're not calling anybody, no one's visiting, everybody's in where they're supposed to be, and you are exactly where you are needed and exactly where you are supposed to be in this like almost like a cocooning, like a complete seclusion from the rest of the world.
absolutely. It was very special, actually. It was just me and my husband and our baby. And it was like such a private time, and such a holy time.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, it was, something I don't wish on anyone, but like if we had to go through it, I think, it's something that we'll never forget.
of
It was
course.
a very special time, yeah.
I'd love for you to share his name because you did name him.
Yes, we named him Refoel. We did want people to daven for him, and that's why even before he was 8 days and before he had his breast, we did give him a name. So his name is Refoel, and yeah, all our children know that Refoel is one of their brother.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
What is it? Talk to me about the he died on Yom Kippur, right?
No, he actually
No, he made
didn't.
it through.
So he made it through. Look, it was like a difficult Yom Kippur in that I don't know, I can't remember what the actual terminology is, but he actually on the hour stopped breathing, and like I thought he was dying in my hands. He like sort of went blue and stopped breathing, and then he came back to life, and that happened every hour. And the first time it happened just as Yom Kippur came in, I was like, oh my gosh, he's dying. That's it. And then he came back to life, and it happened literally every hour. He stopped breathing, went blue,
Oof.
and came back, and it was scary. It was really, really, really scary. But unfortunately, like anything, you get used to it. And by the end of it, like after 24 hours, we're realizing, okay, he's going to stop breathing, but he is going to come back. Of course, I knew at one point he's not going to come back, but we sort of got used to that. Matzi Yom Kippur came, and we were still holding our beautiful baby. And I think the family at home, my parents, my in-laws, everyone they had a really hard Yom Kippur because they didn't know what was going on.
Sure.
They called and they came in that night and they brought us food to eat. And we were absolutely exhausted because 24 hours of really not sleeping. And we didn't know how long this was going to go on for. So it was, there were some people in our community. I think my brother-in-law was one of them, and there was another two people who offered to take turns and come and just hold him through the night just so that we could get some sleep. So we did sleep that night.
That
I
must have
I
been
could
so hard for you to leave.
I was going to say that I remember having nightmares. Like I was trying to fall asleep, knowing that I needed the sleep, but also
Yeah.
knowing that I didn't want to miss anything. I remember there was a code blue at some stage. I was, and I heard the code blue and I ran in my pajamas, out to see, is this my baby? And yeah, it wasn't. So I went, back and tried to,
Mm.
get some more rest. But like morning came around and we had rested enough that we could face another day. Um, Again, we had some visitors come in. My siblings came in. They came in to see Refoel. And as we got closer to nighttime, I was like, I could see he was getting weaker and weaker. And at some point, I think it was about 10 o'clock at night, I still remember I was saying to Hillam, and I still, every time I get to that page, it was Yom Yud Aleph, and I still know that place in the Tehillim when I just looked at him and realized that he wasn't alive anymore.
Mm.
And he had just literally gone to sleep very peacefully, not like all the times that he had gone blue and suffocated and whatever. This time he just went to sleep very, very peacefully. And I knew that he had died. Um, we called the Chevra Kadisha before we actually called the hospital staff, because we weren't actually sure what the halachas are, if they're allowed to touch him or anything. But then we did have to call the medical staff to get the death certificate. And I remember this young doctor coming in and he was literally shaking. It was the first time he had seen a dead baby. And we had to
Oh
sit there
my.
down. But really, I think at that point, I was just numb. I was numb because really, if you think about it, my baby had just died, and how could I even function? But really, I was just like, just going through the motions. I remember taking my baby and putting him down. And then now when I think about it, I can cry, but like I just did it and I covered him and that was it. It was so like, it was final. And the Chevra Kadisha took him, and the man from the Chevra Kadisha came and picked him up, and then we packed up our things and went home. And I just remember leaving the hospital empty-handed was so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When you came home, what do you remember the children saying or doing?
Okay, so we came home after midnight, and I remember just being that exhausted that I just went straight to sleep. And I don't know, I slept. I don't even know how. I must have been that tired that I
Sure.
actually slept. But then waking up in the morning, that was when the reality hit me that I had just lost my baby. I didn't have a baby, and I had to now face the world. And, Yom Tov was coming, Sukkot was 3 days later. I had Baruch Hashem, 5 children at home who were, waiting for me. I mean, some of them may have been out at the time, but I wanted them home for Yom Tov. And I wanted to have a beautiful Yom Tov. And I wanted my kids to have the most normal Yom Tov that they could have. I didn't want them to be sad. And I just remember putting on this really strong front for everyone else and just, we did have a beautiful Yom Tov and we spoke to our children. And I remember we took lots of photos that week that we had with Refoel, and we made a photo album, and I put up the photos on my fridge, and I had this beautiful picture up on that we framed on the wall in my kitchen of Refoel's hand grasping my finger, and we put it up on the wall in the kitchen. And I think at that time, 13 years ago, I was a bit out there. People weren't used to having someone talk about their baby dying and putting up pictures, and it was a bit out there for some people, but this is what I needed to do. And I'm seeing that this was the healthy way. Like I really, really processed my grief. I worked through it. That year was a very, very painful year, but I really, really did a lot of work. And to me, that meant, speaking to people about it and talking about it. And we went on to publish a story in one of the magazines. And we did it under pen names, but I did put an email address that people could contact us. And I had a lot of people reach out to me because so many people had gone through similar stories or not even so similar. And people just wanted to talk. They wanted support. They wanted that connection to someone who understood. Um, so yeah, I did a lot of that, I remember getting hundreds of emails and then realizing, no, this is not, I'm not ready for this yet. But I heard, really, really difficult stories of people who had not done what I had done. Someone reached out to me back then that she had had a stillbirth 40 years earlier
Hmm.
and left the hospital without even looking at the baby, just ran home. And to this day, she was still having nightmares. Why did she do that? Why didn't she look at her baby? She didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl.
Wow.
And that's how they dealt with it back then.
Sure.
Yeah, so I remember that being, yeah, just having that feeling of like a lot of people had gone through this, but I felt like I had really done a lot of work to sort of make the process easier, like by doing my research, by knowing that I wanted to bond with my baby. And that was something I didn't mention before. I had actually looked into if that was the right thing to do.
Wow.
Um, and that's why I was so, conscious of the fact that I did want to get to know my baby and I did want to hold him and I did want to spend the time and take photos. And I wanted him to be a part of the family. And I really think he is. Baruch Hashem, I've had three more children after him, and my kids who were born after him know about Refoel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's a part of the family.
Is there any part that you wish that you had done differently when you think back about the post-loss experience? Is there anything that you're like, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had known this? Is there any like I wish I could have or known differently?
Um, Not really. I don't think so. I think
Yeah.
I'm quite comfortable with how we went through that year. It was hard, but no, I think yeah, it was
You did
good.
right. You did good,
I
as we
think
say.
I did
You
right.
did
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
I know that Yomi's not here to share his own opinion, and he probably has a really good opinion on this. But when you think about what your husband went through during that year, is there anything that you'd like to share about what his experience was like, similarly or different to yours?
I don't think I think we did this together. I think it was very much our shared journey that we went through together. And I feel it really made us stronger. And I'm very grateful for that fact that we were able to have that, that good connection and just be able to support each other. And yeah, I really feel that it was our shared journey that
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
were.
I will say that like watching the two of you together, it's so obvious the relationship that you have together. It was like I've said to a couple people who I've met, I'm like, you have to understand, you just want to like hang out with certain people. And one of the reasons I liked hanging out with the two of you was the dynamic between the two of you, watching that beautiful, healthy, so respectful relationship between the two of you. And when we had opportunity to talk about your experience, he was right there talking with us. And I think that that was a little bit unusual and also so profound, like to hear him share his perspective of losing the shared child, your child to come, that it was it was meaningful to hear a man talk about the death of his child in the way that he did, as the same way you talk about it as us and we is the same way he spoke about it. And I think that that was so powerful, so powerful. I'm thinking about what came next because, as you said, you've been blessed with three more adorable, high energy children, especially your little guy.
Yeah.
Tell me about the trajectory from the loss 13 years ago into the growth of your supporting your kind of development of a partnership with Knafayim and developing the Knafayim program in Australia. What prompted it?
Okay. So as I said, I knew when I even before I gave birth that I was going to share my story. I knew that I drew strength from reading about other people who had gone through something and come out better at the other end, and I knew I was going to
Mhm.
share my story. So really, like 6 months after we lost Refoel, I had my article printed in the Bina magazine, and people reached out to me, and I saw there was this need for people to have support when going through any reproductive loss. Um, I ended up, I think it was Malky Claristenfeld who was running the loss department at the time, the pregnancy loss department of a time.
Yes.
She reached out to me and said, "Can we put your story into our loss packet? And I said, for sure. And then we connected, and I thought, maybe I could bring in some of those, those chizuk packages to Melbourne and be able to support people locally. And she sent me 15 packages, and I sort of had them here, and I sort of advertised that I don't know, where do you advertise that you have,
Right,
you know,
right.
I put out cards in the mix, and I think people knew that I had lost my baby, so automatically people reached out to me.
Mm,
Um, so I really, for the next few years, I was just like trying to support anyone who reached out to me or who had a loss or anything, like, wherever I could be helpful, I tried to do that. But then fast forward to 2019, Malky set up her own organization called Knafayim. And she was in touch and said she'd love us to set up something, us to join her and set up the organization here in Australia. So Yumi and I, together with Mr. Chaim Klein of the Adas Chevra Kadisha, set up the organization here in Melbourne by training up a whole lot of midwives, doctors, color teachers, Rebbitzins, and we had Malky train us to be volunteers, to support anyone going through reproductive loss, as well as we brought in her beautiful support package that we can give out to anyone who goes through a loss. We did another more extensive training 2 years later. So we have a fantastic team here in Melbourne. And we've done 2 awareness events. We had one that's how I met you.
that's right.
A couple of weeks ago, Malky, as well as yourself, came out to Australia just to educate, create awareness, and to support the team. And we had a lot of meetings with community
Like all
people,
different people. Yeah.
represents. Yeah, it was amazing. And I think we really opened up people's eyes to the fact that there's support out there, there's help out there. No one should struggle alone. And there is a way to do it. Like, we can guide you, we can help you. Just
Yeah.
ask, reach
Yeah.
out, we're there to help.
When you think about where your life is today, independent of the volunteerism, but just thinking about, you talk about Refoel, he's part of your family story. You have his photos in a beautiful album. How do you think about this experience in your life today?
Okay, so I'm not the same person that I was 13 years ago. I have grown. I have a deeper appreciation for everything life. I'm a different person. I have changed. And I just want to be there to make a difference in this world and help people wherever I can so that they don't have to struggle alone.
You had said to me that you said, I wanted to be very clear, like I don't think about this story every day,
Yeah.
right? Tell
Yeah.
me about that experience.
Okay. I feel like 13 years down the track, I'm definitely not thinking about Refoel every single day. I do think about him here and there, but my loss doesn't define who I am. Whereas the year after, for 2 years after, maybe even for 3 years after, it was something that I lived with daily. It was a very painful experience to have gone through, and I carried it. But I feel like I've processed it, and I feel like I'm in a very healthy place now, and I can now support people from a healthy place.
And also that like it's okay that he's not every minute, every hour, that he's
Yes,
still part of
yes,
your life, he's still part of your
yes,
story, he's part of your family, and that hasn't changed even as time
yes,
has
yes.
passed. I have to acknowledge that that 13th year is always a big year for, for the birth of a little boy, and that there must be little boys in your community who are having a bar mitzvah this year, women that you probably shared a pregnancy with. Can you tell me a bit about what that's like for you?
Yes. So recently I did get a bar mitzvah invitation, and like opening up that invitation and looking at it was like, oh my gosh. Like I didn't think of it as much. Like I knew he would have been bar mitzvah this year, but just seeing that invitation, it was like Rafael would have been having his bar mitzvah now. And that was like a big, I don't know, I just had this big feeling of, gosh, this is hard. I didn't So I don't think about it every day, but when there's those big milestones, then you do suddenly
Mm.
think of,
And what do you do for yourself? I think women need to hear this. Like in that moment when you have that like opening of the invitation, tell me what the thoughts are in your mind and in your heart as you go through it.
I just let myself feel. I just think back to, the pain that I had, but where I am today,
Mm.
and how lucky I am to be where I am today. And I'm very blessed. I thank Hashem that I did go on to have, you know, more children. And I have a very busy life, and I am, very busy with a lot of different things. So I'm very lucky. I don't take that for granted. There are people who go through loss and don't get what I got. They may, some don't have children again afterwards. And, I'm very blessed, and I have a lot of gratitude um to be where I am today.
And I love though how the first words you said was, I let myself feel, right? Because I think
Yeah.
that's the essence. The essence is to say, I let myself feel. And I also feel gratitude, but I first let myself feel the feelings, experience of, whew, this is hard. I didn't see this one coming, and it is hard. And honoring what that is like in each person's experience. I'd love for us to complete our conversation today with to finish off with what are some misconceptions that you would like people to know about this process of keeping a pregnancy when there's a known fetal anomaly and knowing that you're going to have to do probably one of the hardest things you're going to have to do in your life, which is caring and bonding and loving this child that's going to die and not knowing when or what and how and pulling from these reservoirs within you that I think are we never know we have them until we do.
Yeah.
But what are some of the misconceptions that you'd like people to understand better?
I think I would say one of the misconceptions is that people think that maybe they're better off not seeing the baby and
Mm.
not bonding with the baby. And maybe it's going to be easier if we don't ever know that we just, pretend that it never happened. And that's definitely, I mean, I saw that, I feel that week that I got with my baby was a huge gift. Um, so I think that is something that, and especially in Knafayim, that's something that we try to, um, how would I say it? We we
Like help
we try
people
to
understand. Yeah, and
we try to
encourage.
guide
Yeah.
people and encourage people to know that even, someone who has a stillbirth, if they get to see the baby and spend a few minutes with the baby, that will always be there. That time will always be there. Whereas if they don't do that, they'll always have regrets and wonder like, why didn't I do it?
Yeah.
So I think that would be one of the misconceptions that I have.
I will say one thing. I want to just put in the word they may have regrets, that there are going to be people who will say, I do not regret not seeing my baby. But I would say more of our universal experience from many, many years and many unfortunate cases and with the opportunity to help that there definitely are though I have never met anybody who regretted meeting and getting to know their baby even in life or in death. But I want to just put in that one little word of like they may, because there's definitely going to be somebody who doesn't. What else? Any other misconceptions that you want people to think about?
Mm, I don't have anything that comes to mind. I should have prepared myself, but I didn't.
That's okay. You don't have to.
It
You
comes
know,
to mind. Is there anything that you can think of that you want to ask me?
you know what I think when I hear you speak? I hear I think that there's a misconception that if you do this, it will like ruin you in some way. That in some way, if you make this choice, it will be so devastating that it's worse than potentially terminating a pregnancy. Like that the choices relating to like how hard this may be is really I think there's a lot of assumptions. And I love that you were able to say, I'm going to, we made this decision, choice or no choice, we made this decision, and you claimed this decision so completely. And when I hear you describe your life today and your emotional health and your communication about this and how he's part of your story, how Refoel is part of your story, I want people to see like it also can look like this.
Yeah,
And I think that there can be this misconception that this isn't available. And I think it is.
yeah.
I think it is. Dvori, I'm so grateful that you said yes. It wasn't so bad, right?
No, it wasn't.
And
No, I'm glad I did this.
I'm so glad you did too. And Refoel's story really matters. And I think that every time you tell his story and the story of his parents, it helps one other person. Someone else is going to listen to this podcast and say, okay, this is an opportunity for me to understand what it means when somebody goes through something like this. And also, if they are facing their own decisions and their own choices, that this also is a choice. And it's so valuable. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful.